again, the third day of the 8th edition of our International Literary Festival, which is entirely online. But even though you cannot be with us physically, you can ask your questions on our Facebook page. Today we'll talk to Chris Cleave, another author in our international program. He is British, he was born in London. Three of his books have already been translated into Bulgarian. And here I have his original debut. This is the last one I read, and since the newest, the latest one, Everyone Brave is Forgiven, is very recent, and I haven't had the time. And now we start our talk with Chris. Moderator would be Yana Genova, and Yana will also take part as his translator.
Hello. Good evening. We are here to talk today about Chris Cleave's latest book in Bulgarian, Everyone Brave is Forgiven. That is just out of press a few days ago, literally this Wednesday. A pleasure talking to you. Welcome, Chris, to the Sofia International Literary Festival. Pleasure talking to you, Yoana. Before we start, though, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about this rather unusual situation that we are into, having to converse online digitally, and more generally, how did this forced digitalization of our lives have affected your personal life, but also your professional lives as a writer for you, Chris, as a publisher, as a translator? How did the situation affected your life?
Thanks for asking. I think first of all, I'd like to say, how does this feel? This feels amazing, that the book festival is going ahead, that you're making it happen, even though it's almost impossible. I think that's a really beautiful thing. And as someone who really believes in literature and believes that we have stories that can help us through times like this, I think it's really important. So how does it feel? I'm really sad not to be in Sofia. I was looking forward to this for all year, and I'm really sorry not to be there with you in person. But I think that this is a very beautiful way to do it anyway. So I think it's quite exciting. I think it's happy. And in general, how has that digitization changed things for me? In many ways, not at all, because here where I am, this is where I work. I just carry on. In other ways, I have another sort of second life. I'm training as a psychotherapist at the moment, and it's changed that way of working a lot. So you realize how much you miss when you're speaking remotely with someone. You realize how important it is just to be together, and the way we communicate without saying much. I think some of that is lost. How have you found it?
Nevena Dishleva is Chris Cleave's translator and publisher into Bulgarian. So how do you find it?
For me, being an introvert, this is kind of welcome. Of course, I will set aside the health issues and everything that I'm concerned about in regard of my friends and family and loved ones. But otherwise, I really don't see any difference. I'm really sorry that I cannot see Chris in person. I really wanted to see him because although we've exchanged quite a lot of emails, we haven't seen each other. But work-wise, it's not much different for me. I've been working at home for many years, and actually I decided that if something is not in my control, I better don't take it as a problem, but try to turn the problem into an opportunity. And now I'm trying to do things that I wasn't able to do in the last year, like putting effort in digital marketing and things like that, ebooks, online sales. So things that are important and will become more important, I think.
Yeah, will be. It's in a way. Some people say in a way it's liberating as well, not to have to be present at all the social events and book launches that we normally feel obliged to attend.
Yeah, it gives you a legitimate excuse not to attend events that you don't like to attend.
Yeah. But still, really, Chris, we would be happy to have you in person next year in December for the Sofia Literature Festival.
Thank you.
Now, let's talk about Everyone Brave. Would you please tell us a little bit more about the origin of the book? How did you embark on the topic of World War II? Given that there are so many films and books and a wealth of research on the war, what else? What new can you tell us about the war in this book?
So I claim no kind of originality or insight for my writing. All I say is that it's a story about the human heart threading itself through that war. So the reason I began writing it is because I found a big box of letters that were written between my grandparents on my mother's side. And there were hundreds of these letters, and they'd started just before the war. They fell in love, and then they were immediately separated. You know, they'd met 9 times before the war separated them, and so when they got engaged, my grandmother had this ring made, and it had 9 little like tiny diamonds in it, and it's 1 diamond for each time they'd met. And I just that was what got me really excited about them and about that generation who had to have such enormous faith in each other when they were separated by this war. And so I think this is a book that's quite a small story about a very big war. It's about 2 people trying to find each other and often missing. And is it bringing something new to that enormous body of literature about World War II? I don't know. I think every human story is worth telling. I think every human story is new. Do I have a theory about war that's original? No. Do I think war is sad? Yes, like everyone does. So I don't think my originality resides in that. I think if my work has any merit, it's a kind of openness of heart and a willingness to tell stories of people who are pushed to the extremes of that experience.
Well, so in a way, it started as a journey in your family history.
Yeah.
And then it continued as a journey of European history or British history. And the way Britain today reflects on its past. This is something that you talk about in the foreword for the Bulgarian reader of Everyone Brave.
Yeah. I mean, I think that every historical novel is really a novel about the time that the author is living through. And the reason I wanted to write this now is because I think my country, the UK, has gone a little bit crazy about its history. So we have a vision of ourselves in the Second World War, which is a heroic vision, and we lean on that really heavily. And in as much as that's deserved, it's a beautiful thing. But when it goes beyond what is deserved, then it becomes a kind of false patriotism, a false confidence, like a misplaced idea of who we are in the world. And so when I tell a story, it's not a political story. It's not a heroic story. It's a story about the ambiguity and the uncertainties of war. No one's actually brave all the time. No one's actually heroic. A lot of it is about luck. A lot of it is about sadness. A lot of it is about realizing that no one really wins in a war. Everyone just makes their accommodation with it. And if there's a version of history that I'd like to tell, it's that version. It's an ambiguous and quiet vision of a history in which no one wins when there's conflict.
Yes, indeed. Everyone Brave is clearly historical fiction. But your other books also have references to real historical events of nowadays. The other hand, takes place on the background of the guerrilla wars in Nigeria. My favorite one, your first book, Incendiary. I find it difficult. I was practicing almost throughout the whole day to pronounce the title. But the Bulgarian title is much easier to pronounce. So in Incendiary, the reference is to terrorist attacks. So there is always, at least in the 3 books that I have access to, there is always a historical a fact, a real life fact that triggers the plot somehow. Do you have other writings that are that do not follow that pattern? Do you, or is there a particular strategy here?
Oh, I see. Well, first of all, thank you for reading the books. It means a lot to me, and thanks. I'd like to thank Novena as well. The fact that these exist in Bulgarian is because, Novena's translated them all herself, and that I find incredibly moving as a writer, to have someone that cares about the work and that puts it forward like that. So it's entirely thanks to you, Novena, that these exist. I just wanted to say that while I'm here and meeting you in this way, which is a crazy way to meet. but thank you so much. Is there a pattern? I don't think I have a pattern. I'm interested in small lives, like small people who are caught up in big events. That my people aren't heroes, and they are complicated. And I think what all my books have in common is that an event happens that pushes them to the extremes of life, right? So in Incendiary, and thank you for reading that, a mother loses her son in an attack, and she doesn't prevent the attack. She's not heroic. She doesn't become famous from it. She doesn't do anything at all except grieve, right? And it's a story about heartbreak. And I've been always interested in how we recover from heartbreak. Or in the other book that you mentioned, The Other Hand, these conflicts that were happening at the time I was writing in the Delta area of Nigeria were displacing a lot of refugees. And although that's a big political conflict, actually what it does is it makes individual human beings heartbroken. And so again, and by telling her story, I tell the story of a small person in this big political world. And I think if my books have anything in common, it's that, that they're books about the journey of the human heart, from happiness to heartbreak, and then into some kind of recovery. I'm really interested in recovery, how we get better.
It's never a full recovery though. But since you mentioned Nevena Dishlieva, maybe it's, and also you mentioned incendiary, maybe it's time to invite Nevena to join us as well in this conversation. Indeed, Chris, I have to say you are incredibly lucky to have Nevena and ICU Publishers as your publisher in Bulgaria. It's a small independent publisher. And also finding they always manage to find innovative ways of marketing their authors, finding readers, and I bet Chris Cleave has devoted audience already here in Bulgaria, and that's entirely because of you, Nevena. So I was wondering, how did it all start? You published 3 books of his. Perhaps a 4th one is.
Yeah, I hope so.
A 4th one is coming into Bulgarian. So how did you come across Chris Cleave, and why this dedication to his writing?
Let me first thank you both for the nice words. I always feel awkward when people say good things about me. It's really very awkward. As how did I meet him? His books, my publishing house was established in 2012, and I had a very clear idea what I wanted to publish. I thought that, and I still am thinking that there is a gap for books that are related to mutual understanding and multiculturalism and empathy, books that invite us to be better human beings. So that is something that I wanted to to publish, and I was looking for this kind of books. And so the right place to search and to find books, of course, is Frankfurt Book Fair. So I was headed to attend the book fair in 2012. And from my previous experience, I knew that it was not only professional meetings that meet people with authors and translators, with writers, and make all this communication, but it's also you read books all the time. So the first thing I did after landing at the airport was to enter the bookstore at the airport, and I saw this tiny orange book. I haven't heard the name Chris Cleave, but I just bought the book. It's the same copy actually for €10.99 here. And I have no idea why this book just said by me, but I did. And later in the U-Bahn, traveling to the hotel, I read the first sentence on the back cover, and it says, "We don't want to tell you what happens in this book. It's a truly special story, and we don't want to spoil it." Okay, they are good at marketing. They want me to be manipulated, to provoke me to read this book. But because of Frankfurt and everything, I was really willing to be manipulated, and I read it in just one sit the same night. And then the next morning, I called Mira Drumova, who is the sub-agent for Bulgaria, for representative of Roger Kolwich and White, who are the agents of Chris. And I was so excited. I said, Mira, I want to publish everything that this author has written and will ever write. Which is very untypical for me, actually, because I'm a very hesitant person. I always have doubts in me, never sure what step to take next. But this was like, some people call it quantum moment, like something that's really intense in your life and you are certain that you want to do this. So that's how I met him.
So it's not because his agent was very proactive. It was sheer luck, and
but this was really the first. I think I have chosen one book before that, and it was The Obscure Logic of the Heart by Priya Basil, which is also related to multicultural things and empathy and things like that I'm interested in. But nobody knew about ICU, actually. Nobody was interested to offer me any kind of books. So it was mere luck.
Okay. So as a translator, do you think that translating a living author is a privilege, or some say it's a curse? I've heard it from translators. Do the two of you, do you communicate with each other? Do you ask him questions? Is he giving you, Chris, is she?
Yeah, she's like, okay, so Nevena is an amazing translator and has it absolutely covered. And the reason I know is because the questions she asks me are really good. So like in this, she doesn't ask me many questions. She translates the whole book, and then I think with Everyone Brave, Nevena, you sent me like 10 questions after you'd finished translating it. And each of the questions showed me that you really understood the book, which I was incredibly questions from translators. And I just think, oh no, this is going to be really difficult. But with you, like your questions showed, like really, they were very particular questions about how you would turn one concept into Bulgarian. So I use lots of different registers of English, and that's really what I do. I'm a stylist and a fantasist, actually, and so my work is in the interplay of different registers, like what people say and what they don't say and what they mean. And so there's a lot of silence in the books, and there's a lot of what I would call vernacular, like this sort of really idiomatic use of English. And especially with Everyone Brave is Forgiven, you know, I'm writing in this 1940s mode of expression where the whole point of the way they speak is that they're not saying exactly what they mean, you know, and that is really difficult to translate. And I think Nevena has done an amazing job, and I know that because the questions she asked really were all about those different levels of meaning in the language, you know. So I think it was a really difficult book to translate, and I just want to thank you again, Nevena, for doing it. You know, it's because it's an enormous amount of work, and it's a very creative piece of work, right? So to be a translator, you know, is an enormous creative work, right? And when I've read books in translation, I've always been fantastically impressed by how you have to not just translate but interpret into a culture and into a language, you know. And I love that you do this with my stuff. Like you really make it your own and you bring it, you know, into a new life through this. So, I mean, I don't know, how does it feel to you, Nevena?
I really, I don't know, I've always thought that I'm asking silly questions, and you always tell me that there are these fundamental and important questions, and I think it's because you're a very kind and generous person, actually. But really, there are translators I know that prefer to stick to the text as it is. It doesn't matter if the writer is living or not. They say, okay, we have the text, and that's the material that we are going to work with. But for me, it's really important to be sure. And sometimes I've asked him if there are translations in other languages that I can use as reference, how for strategies for some certain words. and it was important for me to choose the exact way how to translate something. But also, it's not only professional things. I think the replies that he's giving me are like short essays, like pieces of literature by themselves. And I really appreciate this, and I love reading these answers. And also, they make me know him better, I think, as a person, as a human being, which is very important for me. Because you know this saying that you cannot give what you don't have. I feel that Chris is a really compassionate and empathic person with a lot. If I didn't believe him, not only believe, I trust him very much.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, reading his books, I can fully understand that. But if you allow me, just another question on the art of translation. Chris mentioned the register of the language, and also the silences. But my question is about really the language of the characters or the narrator. In the case of Incendiary, that is in most cases very much rooted in a particular epoch, as it is with Everyone Brave. They speak the way people spoke in the 1940s, or the language is rooted in a particular culture or geography, as it is with Incendiary, for example. The narrator, this first person singular narrator in the book, the book is structured as a letter to Osama bin Laden. There is almost no punctuation, broken grammar. She is clearly from a working class background, East London working class background. And I was reading it in Bulgarian. I was wondering all the time, and admiring you for resisting the temptation to domesticize that language and to make that the characters speak as a working class Sofia inhabitant from Obelia neighborhood or one of these working class neighborhoods of Sofia. Same with the voice of the Nigerian, of the Jamaican girl in The Other Hand, this pidgin English. Same with as I said, the characteristic language of the 40s in Everyone Braves. So is there any particular strategy that you follow when you have to translate language that is so heavily loaded, that is so strongly based in a class or culture that is distant from ours?
Actually, I tried different strategies. At first, I went in this path of trying to domesticize it, as you said. I tried with slang, the way people from different neighborhoods or in different part of the country, dialects, and I was sure it was not working. And I remember I asked Chris questions about specific words about incendiary, and at the end of his short essay that his answer was, he wrote that British English has as many words for class as Inuits have for snow. And this was kind of, this clicked with me, and I understood that there's no point of trying to say something that we don't have words for in Bulgarian. And that's why I decided to switch entirely in another direction and to apply a strategy which is very simple, And this strategy relates to very simple Bulgarian words, common words, like proverbs and adverbs and verbs, which we use in our language all the time, but they have different registers, like you can choose whether to be more formal or more colloquial. So I made the character speak with whenever possible. She spoke with these colloquial words, and that made the language like a live language, not like a written narrative. And I think it works. It works okay for her. And about the commas that you mentioned in Incendiary, it was really the biggest problem, the bigger problem for me, because when you take out the commas out of a sentence, the relations between different words become strange. Sometimes two words put together without a comma, they can enter like an opposition, or they can overlap the meaning somehow. So with the most difficult sentences, I try to put them like a normal sentence, writing the commas and grammatically correct and everything. And then sometimes I switched the order, the word order. I try to adjust the sentence somehow. And when it sounded controversial and dual, there was dual meaning in it, just then I took out the commas to make it the way that it's in the original.
Well, it does work very well in Bulgarian indeed. I don't know, I was maybe Chris, being translated into how many, 30 languages, that I imagine you don't master all of them. How does it feel being translated into? Because one of the characteristic things about your books and your characters that, as you said, are they're always surrounded by brutal, dramatic events, but it's the quotidian and the everyday that you are interested in. But another very specific thing about your writing is that it's also funny. These absolutely memorable characters, Little B, they have incredible, Mary as well, they have incredible sense of humor. Do you fear that any of this, not always English humor, but sometimes also typical English humor, may get lost in translation?
That's such a great question. I don't know. I mean, I worry a bit, yeah. And I know that some translations haven't really captured that. And I think that's why someone like Novena, who translates the way a poet translates, right, is really important, because then you're not trying to literally translate a meaning, you're trying to convey an atmosphere. And so I think my humor for people, it comes it just from an enjoyment of people who are funny, and if that character meets tragedy with a kind of irony or a kind of resilience that comes from within themselves, I think if the translator understands why they're funny, then it will come across very well in the language that it's being translated into. So as you say, with the character of Little B, or the narrator in Incendiary, or Mary in Everyone Brave, the reason they're funny is because their life is really hard, and often they're in conditions of poverty, and laughter is this incredible currency. It keeps you alive. You know, when I was researching these stories, I met people who were only alive because they had a sense of humor. Right, it's a weapon, and I loved people for that. And I think that if the translator understands why those people have to be funny to survive, then they'll find a way to translate the sentiment, you know, to make it funny somehow on the page, I think.
And they also don't experience themselves as victims, even though they are surrounded by dramatic events. They are experiencing really brutal events. They don't think of themselves as victims.
Yeah, exactly.
Which perhaps, yeah.
Sorry.
Which brings me to the, sorry?
I was just apologizing for interrupting you, sorry.
I was also apologizing for interrupting you by interrupting you. Which brings me to the question about your therapeutic practice. I can't fail asking, is there any connection between your writing, your work as a writer, and your psychotherapeutic practices?
Yeah, there's definitely a connection. So this started while I was researching a book that Nevena has on her desk there. I can see it just down there. It's the multicolored one. Yeah. So this is the next book that I think Nevena is going to publish. And so a lot of this book is about a very sick child. And so when I was researching the book, I spent a lot of time in a children's hospital in London. And the hospital is called Great Ormond Street Hospital. And a doctor and a cancer specialist let me shadow his work. And while I was doing that, I met these psychotherapists on what they call the end of life care team. So these are the people who work with very sick and sometimes dying children. And I have never known before like that kind of commitment and that kind of engagement with life. These people really impressed me, and I saw the work that they did, and I became really curious about the work. So I started training at first as a counselor, just out of curiosity, really, to see what that world was like, because I thought maybe I would write a book about it, maybe I would write about that world. And actually drew me in. And so now I'm training to actually become a practicing therapist myself. And I'm not going to write a book about it, actually. It's a completely different way of being, I think. So I think what they have in common is that as a writer and as a psychotherapist, you're very curious about people, and you're interested in how they feel their world and how they live it and how they describe it, and you kind of walk alongside them for a little to understand the world from their point of view, in their words, on their terms. And then if you're a writer, you go off and write about it. You have an agenda, you're going to tell a story, and there it is. And I think as a psychotherapist, you have that same curiosity, but you don't have an agenda. The only thing you're trying to do is be there for your client, just be there for them. And so it was writing that brought me into that world. But it's a very different world, I think, from the world of being a novelist. I'm going to do both. I'm going to practice as a therapist, but I'm going to carry on writing. But not about therapy. I mean, that's really important as well. And it's really important that what happens in therapy just stays there. It's because it's for the client, it's for the person. It doesn't become a story for anyone else.
Yeah, the question was not implying that your next book will be based on stories that you hear in your practice. But still, with literary characters, control them as a writer, don't you? And that's also, or they tend to control you from time to time.
That's a good question. When you talked before about the fact that the characters have a sense of humor, I think that's the interface between where I control them and where they control me. So like often I've written a book like 1 or 2 times, and then on the third draft, like something happens and like the character will suddenly say a line that makes me laugh, and it seems to have come out of nowhere like a dream does. And then at that point I start to like the character, and they start to do this thing. You know, what you were saying earlier on actually is that the characters aren't victims. And I think the point at which they start to find their own situation darkly funny is the point at which I really start to like them, you know, and it's also the point at which I feel that I lose control of them. You know, and then the writing becomes much more like the experience of dreaming, and the character really starts to come alive, and it's a very mysterious process, and not one that I completely understand. But I really like your question, because I think about it a lot and I don't know the answer. I don't know whether I control the character or whether the character controls me.
There are some comments here in the chat from our audience. Please feel free to ask questions to Chris Cleave, and also to comment on what you hear. Chris, you mentioned children. There is Nicoleta Dumanova writes that she read the book, Everyone Brave. She read the book with her 10-year-old daughter, and she's laughing and crying with me. The better way to learn about war than any textbook. Keep making history meaningful for the children of today and tomorrow. This is not a question; it's rather a comment. There is a question about beliefs, but maybe I will leave that one for later on. I don't want the conversation to get too serious, although I mean, your books are dramatic enough, although they are also very delicate and compassionate. So I'm having troubles, keeping the conversation, lightening up the conversation, yet remaining faithful to the spirit of your writing.
Thank you for being sensitive to that. You know, I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you to Nicoleta as well. I'm just reading that comment now, and it's made me really happy. I think that's brilliant. Thank you for reading it, and thank you for reading it with your daughter. And I'm really pleased that you both enjoyed it. That really means a lot to me.
There is one question though. I just promise I'll keep the conversation light, but actually, yeah, I'm tempted to make it more political, and actually ask the question that I very much want to ask you this evening, and it's about the role of literature in changing societies. The other day, 2 days ago, Salman Rushdie was here, well, not here in Sofia, but he was guest of the Sofia Festival in conversation with Dmitry Kenarov. And he said, on a question about how literature works, he literally said that we can't expect literature to lead to direct social action or change.
Okay.
At the same time, my feeling is that there is such an ambition, such a project in your writing, and I would like to quote Alistair from Everyone Brave is Forgiven, everybody's favorite character, I guess, after Little B. Alistair, for the Bulgarian readers who still haven't got the chance to read the book, Alistair works in Tate Gallery before the war. Then he enlists in the army. And during his first return in London from the battlefield, he walks the streets of London, thinking about his soldiers and how they're going to spend the short break. And here you write, if there was, I quote, if there was one thing the war had done, it was to change his mind about the class of people who never came into the Tate. Men and good paintings had a genius for escape from the frame. So my question is about these people who never came into the Tate, and about changing minds, of course, because I mean, the war has changed Alistair's mind about people who never came into the Tate. But what about your writing that is so that is charged with so much empathy and compassion for the injustices in this world? So do you have the ambition, Shirley, to change attitudes? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those kind things that you said about the work, and that means a lot. So okay, on one level I agree with Salman Rushdie completely. Like, the purpose of literature is not to change a society, actually, and I think he's right. No, I don't think you can affect direct political change through literature. But the purpose of literature is not to change society. The purpose of literature is to change an individual human heart. And you're not, as an author, trying to change that heart in a way that you want it to change. You're trying to help that person change their heart in the way that they want it to change, right? So what a beautiful novel does is it gives beauty. And it gives beauty, it gives meaning, it sanctifies the lives of these people who don't always go into the Tate Gallery, right? But it says these lives are equally, and that's a very important word, these lives are equally important, right? And what a novel can do is it can elevate a life to the point where you see the beauty. Suddenly you see the beauty. Like, who sees the beauty in it? The reader. Why do they see the beauty in it? Because they are a beautiful reader, right? Because there's something in their heart that sings, right? All you're doing is you're showing them some sheet music, right? But it's them who's singing, it's them who's producing the music when they see that, right? And that is the purpose of literature, right? To give someone something that enables them to play their own song, to make their own music, to see their own beauty in their life, in their world, right? And for me, that is a profoundly political act as a writer, right? So if I can put stuff out into the world that is beautiful, right? Because for me, the struggle in this world is not the left against the right. No, it's the system against the poor. Actually, it's this enormous, colossal, crushing weight that we put on people, And the only way out of it is humor. The only way out from underneath that is beauty. And the only way to turn that beauty into power is to discover that beauty for yourself, to learn your own way of finding meaning, right? That is the beginning of resistance. That's the beginning of the struggle. So for me, I agree that literature isn't a project that explains itself. It isn't a project that says, okay, now everyone follow me. It isn't a project that says, now this is the big idea that we're all going to get behind. It isn't that at all. It's much smaller and it's much quieter, and it speaks to the individual, and then the individual using that book, right, becomes something that they want to be. And that for me is the politics of being a writer. You know, that you believe in the reader. I think this is it, right? So a really good book is one that finds the reader trustworthy, right? And says, right, I'm going to give you something big here, and I think you know what to do with it. and that for me is the politics of it. You know, that for me is how you change things, by trusting people to change themselves when they glimpse the beauty. And I also think that means that it isn't about numbers, right? It isn't about selling 100 million copies of a book. It isn't about getting it made into a movie or a TV show and showing it to the whole world. Actually, it's about changing, you know, one person's heart, you know, and if you can do that, then that's enough, you know, and then you trust them. They will go off and change 10 other people's hearts, you know.
Yeah, I guess we need half a minute of silence here to be able to reflect on what you just said. I wish we had more time to.
I'm so sorry. I've just realized as well that I've realized that must have been really hard for the translator. I'm so sorry.
This is a good moment to thank the interpreters.
Thank you. And
But this is not the end of the conversation, though.
Yeah.
But picking on this topic about attention to the individual, still sometimes there is a problem in the social and political dialogue, and you yourself, from what I know from your website, you are also sometimes an object or a victim of attacks by all sorts of radical racist groups or individuals because of your engagement or your political engagement and your anti-racist pathos of your writing. And I was wondering, what would be your advice, not as a writer, but as a person, as an intellectual, how to talk to these people? Do you try getting into a dialogue through your social media or through your website, or you also have a career as a journalist? You've been writing for The Guardian. How do we get into a conversation with people who basically deny the very conditions of a dialogue, which suppose which suppose that you believe in the dignity of the other person in the first place?
Yeah. No.
So what do we do with these people?
I like your question again, and so I think you have to decide first of all whether you're feeling strong enough to have that conversation. You know, so I always feel that people are where they are, And so if you're feeling strong, and if you're feeling ready to engage with someone who has a radically different view, then that's good. So, but my first piece of advice would be, if you don't have to have every argument, right? You don't have to always engage with these people. And sometimes there's a wisdom in backing away a little bit. But for someone who did want to engage, with people who have that radically different view, the first thing that I've learned is to always treat them with respect, right? Because everybody is where they are. There are people that I disagree with really profoundly, but they are like that because of the life they've had, right? And as I think what I've learned is if you respect the life that they've had, if you're curious about where they've come from, like how they've developed those views, and if you ask everything as a question, you say, oh, really? So how have you come to believe that? What was it that showed that to you in your life? Where do these ideas originate from for you? When you say that, what did you mean by that? And if everything you're asking is for clarification, then there's a possibility that eventually that person will begin to ask those questions of themselves, and it won't be you who has changed their mind. It will be that person who has changed their own mind, right? And that's how we change our minds. We come to our own conclusions, and I think that sometimes we as liberals, I'm going to assume that we're all liberals because we're at a book fair. Sometimes we as liberals forget how our own minds are changed, right? Our minds are never changed by someone coming and telling us that we're wrong. Our minds are changed by us asking these questions of ourselves, that eventually you think, oh, right, interesting. And that's my idea. And that I own that. I will change in that way. So I think that when I have engaged with people who are, racist or very right wing or xenophobic or anti-Semitic, or misogynistic or transphobic, I've talked with a lot of people who have these views. And I don't know if I have ever changed anyone's mind. All I think you can do is just be one part of their life. In that moment, you can be someone who's gentle, who respects them, and who asks them difficult questions. And I like to ask difficult questions, in the hope that they will change for themselves. Sorry, that's a long answer. I'm sorry for the interpreter again.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk about this. There are some, you said difficult questions. There are some questions from the audience as well. I don't know if you find them difficult. For sure, not as difficult as the ones you meant. Let me take few of the questions in Bulgarian here. I'm not going to ask them in Bulgarian. Don't worry. The question is about whether there is anything autobiographical in your novels, and whether you're planning to write an autobiography. Maybe it's too early for you, no? Whether you're planning to write one and whom it will be dedicated to. And then the other question, maybe let's take two. The other question is about, have you encountered your own inner voice in someone else's work, whether a book, film, or another piece of art?
Those are amazing.
Yeah, I also had a similar question about literary influences, but I guess this person means something slightly different, whether you have encountered your own inner voice in someone else's work.
That's a brilliant question. Oh, I like both of those questions. Okay, so the autobiographical thing is really interesting. So when I write, I don't think that I'm writing about myself. So I'm very curious about other people. I interview people, I listen, and I try to mimic the way they speak. Right? So each of my books is based on completely different speech patterns of other people. And I try to change everything about myself. Like I change gender every time. So I'm always writing from a woman's perspective. Sometimes I'll change ethnicity, social class, income level, profession. You know, I try to make myself someone different, like really different, because it forces me to observe. So I don't think they're autobiographical. But then when I read the books back 10 years later, I realized, oh yeah, I was talking about me. and and it's really embarrassing. I, I, I expose myself, I think, more than I realize in my books. So yeah, I would almost say, I think as a novelist, it's impossible not to write autobiographically. I think that's what you're doing. You know, you're writing your own autobiography and giving parts of yourself the names of different characters. The
inner voice.
Yeah, the inner voice. Yeah, in someone else's work. That's a good question. Yes, but not in fiction, right? So there are books, there's novels that I love. There's novels that have changed the way I live, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez has changed who I am, or Milan Kundera actually, or Virginia Woolf, right? These are people who have really changed who I am, but that isn't where I find my voice in literature. I think if there's the one thing that I've really read where I've thought, okay, now someone has understood the way that I perceive and that the memory feels like to me is Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And I think that's where I find a way of seeing that I relate to. But I think in terms of my own inner voice, I don't know. My own inner voice is quite quiet, actually. And I don't think that I know what that voice is, actually. Sometimes I read back stuff that I've written and then I know who I am, you know. But until I've read my own stuff, I don't really know who I am.
Maybe one last question from here from Sofia. There are no more questions from the audience, but I have one that is again going into a very different direction, somehow related to these great writers that you just mentioned, like Virginia Woolf or Kundera. And the one topic that we haven't talked about is children.
Yeah.
And parenthood. There are children characters, quite a lot of them in your book, in your books. You know, you're also interested in topics related to parenthood and education, and you are a father of children.
3.
I was wondering, 3, right? I was wondering whether they read any fiction, and if they do you do you influence their choices? Do you talk about books with them, or they are rather following the nowadays pattern of waiting for your books to be turned into movies and then reading them? I mean, I'm referring to Incendiary being being turned into a film.
So yeah, it's interesting. So my three are 11 years old, 14 years old, and 17 years old, right? So the 17-year-old is much bigger than me, and he's this big sort of tall guy, and he very much has his own literary world now, and I don't really know what it is, you know. So the stuff we talk about is funny stuff that we found on the internet. So so that's our literary level. My middle one is huge into fantasy. So he reads these like epic fantasy novels, and sometimes there'll be like 10 or 15 in the series. And so I know a lot about dragons and a lot about sorcery that I never thought I would knew. No, sorry. And then my 11-year-old, she reads these like extremely emotionally engaged stories about teenage relationships, and which I really like. So I'm kind of addicted to her books as well. So those are the sort of conversations we have, and I really think that this generation does read a lot, and I when I talk with my kids and my kids' friends, yeah, they spend a load of time online. Yeah, they watch lots of movies, but they really like books. They really like ideas. They really talk to each other about that stuff as well. I'm a huge believer in the next generation, the one that's just coming up, because they've dealt with all of our stuff with such a good sense of humor. They don't hate us. And that, I always think, like, the generation that's growing up now, they should really hate us, but they don't. They're good souls, and they want to be part of the solution, and they're reading a lot, and having their own like way of seeing things, and their life is going to be so different from ours, right? They are at just a really different stage of this project that capitalism has to destroy all of us. They've been born into the end game, right? And so their literary references are dystopian, right? They are like books that are crazy, they're apocalyptic, and when you talk about literature with these kids, they see themselves, they really see themselves in these post-apocalyptic fictions that they like, and I'm interested in the emotional resonance they have with that. They see themselves as people who are going to have to survive a dark time, and so I feel that that we should be talking to young people about literature, and we should really be listening, not just to the kind of books that they are reading, but also to why they're reading them, because I think that says a lot about the anxieties that they're going through at the moment, and it's a very anxious time. And I think that their choice of literature really speaks to it.
Rather than pushing Virginia Woolf to them all the time.
Rather than pushing myself, no.
There is one last question from the audience about, of course, about your next book. If you can shortly cover that, please. What are you writing about right now? And actually the question literally says that given that your heart is apparently into Everyone Brave is Forgiven, what will your next book be about?
Well, first of all,
given that apparently you already have your heart is gone into that book.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. What am I writing about now? So I'm writing about the roots of European culture now. And so I am really interested in what we have in common, right? And what we have in common across the different European countries and across the different cultures within those countries, and like what is there that can bring us together, right? And I don't care if I have to go all the way back to the Bronze Age, right, to find something that we can all agree on. And that's what I'm going to do. It's a crazy book that takes ideas that we have all the way back and says, like, where does this come from and who are we? It's set in Paris, and it's about a mother and her daughter who are going through exactly this generational shift. So I feel like there's this comfortable generation of sort of liberal people who have managed to survive so far. And then there are their children who are growing up who feel, actually, it's going to be impossible for me to survive in this world. I will never be able to find a job. I will never be able to pay the rent. I've been completely shut out. And so how do you get a reconciliation between those two generations that really ought to be at war right now? Big political backdrop. But as usual, I try to tell the story in the lives of small people. And so this one is a mother's conflict with her daughter over that big generational split. And the way the book treats it is to take them back, like to trace their ideas all the way back to almost like these Paleolithic feelings that they have. And I don't know, I think it's really exciting. And but then I would because it's my stuff. So, but
Ivana, are we going to see that book published in Bulgarian?
I hope so. And but I know that you're writing it in French, Chris. You promised to turn it into English so that I can translate.
Yeah.
I hope you do this.
Thanks. Thank you. I promise.
Well, a book about the origins of European culture should be written in French, right?
I think so. And I try to do this thing of finding the voice of the character. And so if the characters are in Paris, I have to write them, speaking in their language, and then it flows more naturally. And then I'll translate it back to English. Then, yeah.
We'll be looking forward. I really hate having to wrap this conversation up, but the organizers are, sending me notices. It was a pleasure talking to you, Chris, and to you, Nevena. I have here quite a few praises for your books from the New York Times and Financial Times and the New York Review of Books that I was thinking of quoting. But this morning I went to your website and I looked at the comments section. There is a section with readers' responses. And there is a very, very important comment by a very important person named Jean. I don't know, there is no family name, not from the New York Review of Books. But that's the only comment I want to quote for you. And this certain Jean says simply, Chris, you have a good heart. Full stop. There are long comments and praises, readers' responses at chriscleave.com. But I think this is the one that goes straight to the point. So thank you for having that good heart. Thank you for your books, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you next year in December in Sofia, in person.
Me too. And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for all of your kindness about the work. And thank you, Novena, for everything you do. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you both, and thank you for inviting me.
And of course, thanks to the organizers that managed to, in no time, to transform an offline event into an online, and really to keep the quality of the experience in a way.
Yeah, thank you to them.
Thanks.
And thank you to all of the
Bye.
questions as well that people have sent in.
I would also like to thank Chris, Yana, Nevena, and the interpreters, thanks to whom this conversation, which was originally in English, you heard in Bulgarian. They're called Yoana Stoyanova and Martin Petrov. Thank you. And Chris Cleave's books are not online. You can find them and generally support the book market in Bulgaria, because the industries that are talked about on TV are not the only ones that are suffering. If you can afford it, do support small publishing houses and small bookstores if they need it. We'll continue in a while in 9:30, if I'm not mistaken, when we'll have Georgi Tenev here, so we continue with conversations with writers. Stay with us.
Thank you.